Hey, it's Luke from LT Gaming, and today we're looking at Antimatter, an incredibly ambitious top-down space sandbox that looks like it could appeal massively to fans of games like Starsector and X4. All I can say is yes, please. And Antimatter isn't just about giving you ships and a galaxy to explore. It really wants to simulate the economies, corporations, politics, population, and conflicts happening underneath it all. And the deeper I've dug into the development logs this week, the more interesting it gets. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll give you the playtest details. Before we jump in, if you enjoy finding these smaller space games before they properly launch, fire a photon torpedo at that like button. It really helps the channel. At its core, basically Antimatter is a single-player 4X strategy and space simulation game being developed by Jeffrey Perard, built around a procedurally generated galaxy containing thousands of star systems. The pitch here is that this is supposed to be a genuinely simulated universe with corporations, nations, empires, and individual adventurers all operating and competing. They can even potentially disappear even when the player isn't directly involved. So if you're into the whole immersion side of things like me, this sounds like a dream. You can begin much closer to the bottom of that system as essentially a spaceship captain where you're trading, exploring, mining, all the usual stuff, fighting of course. But the eventual game scales up where you're controlling fleets, colonies, and organizations, and you can even become Galactic Emperor. I'm not feeling like much of a Galactic Emperor today, guys. I had like the virus from hell, so if my voice is a bit shaky, do bear with me. Or perhaps it's an earworm from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And I'm still recovering from mixing those films up on the Star Wars video. I'm not sure how I did that, two of my favourite films ever, but look, it was a funny mistake. But when I've been checking out Antimatter this week, there's a huge amount sitting underneath all the systems. Space combat is seamless and designed around engagements taking place across enormous distances, with kinetic and energy weapons, missile warfare, passive and active sensors, crew management, and detailed damage simulation all thrown in. Outside of combat, Antimatter puts a lot of weight on its economy. You can build up production, move resources around the galaxy, and gradually create a network that supports your ships and settlements. Mining or scavenging can feed into that system, while trade gives you a reason to connect different parts of your operation together. More importantly, the economy isn't simply waiting for the player to use it. Private businesses and financial activity continue in the background, which should help the galaxy feel like it has a life of its own. A very important factor for me. Then you have the planetary side, which really surprised me. You can land on planets and asteroids, establish outposts and colonies, develop cities, and even terraform worlds by modifying their atmospheres and biospheres. Recent development has gone considerably deeper into planetary geology as well, with ore distribution influenced by planetary history, limited accessible surface deposits, and deeper resources that become progressively harder to exploit. Antimatter is therefore trying to connect the space game, colony game, and economic game together, rather than treating them as completely separate layers. And this is where Antimatter starts getting really interesting to me, because plenty of space games tell you that they have a living universe. But Antimatter seems unusually committed to actually building the machinery required to make one. The developer recently explained that around 6 years has gone into the underlying systems, allowing things like ships, industries, projectiles, characters, and AI activity to exist within the same simulation. Development is now increasingly shifting towards gameplay and major content, so the player has a lot to look forward to. That doesn't guarantee that it's all going to work, obviously, but I really like that the simulation seems to have been built first and now they're figuring out how to make a game of it, rather than building a fairly conventional space game and sticking the words living universe onto the Steam page afterwards. Just a quick interlude to say subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 100k and we really need you to get there. We are a proper PC gaming channel. You're going to find all the best games here, including space, war games, RTS, and everything you can think of. We even do some amazing mod spotlights. So if you have amazing taste in games, hit the subscribe button. Both me and Tom really appreciate you. The politics could be one of the features that really separates it as well. You're not simply choosing your faction and instantly becoming supreme leader. The idea here is that organizations have their own political structures and characters have different amounts of influence within them. You can potentially work your way through this organization, gain authority, and eventually hold positions that actually give you control over different parts of it. Recent builds introduce cabinet roles, including positions responsible for fleets, industry, and colonial affairs. While assets themselves sometimes can be controlled for your political influence rather than simply being personally owned. This reminds me of games like Emperor of the Fading Suns, where you could get elected to different positions. Really cool. All of this potentially create something I absolutely love in sandbox games. Progression through influence rather than just money. Imagine beginning with just one ship, building a reputation inside a corporation, getting responsibility for some of its assets, then just casually maneuvering yourself into a political position and eventually having the authority to direct fleets or colonial expansion. Now, these sort of systems are very difficult to pull off, but it's also exactly the sort of progression that could turn a space sandbox like this into a game people play for hundreds, maybe thousands of hours. The latest roadmap makes that universe sound even more alive. Colonies are the next major step now that outposts are described by the developer as almost feature complete, while planets are getting more distinctive features and actual points of interest to discover. Then there's a really cool feature they have planned which I really like, called adventures. These are individual characters who can finance their own spacecraft, join organizations on their own terms, or create organizations themselves. They're intended to independently explore, hunt for points of interest, scavenge wrecks, improve their ships, and potentially build small fleets. Eventually, they're also planned to contribute to the emergence of things like pirate factions and personal rivalries. If this game can create those emergent systems, this could be one of the most immersive games on the horizon. One of the things I'm always curious to see in games like this is the combat action, because it seems like Antimatter is aiming for something much more deliberate than ships simply circling each other and trading damage. Battles can unfold across millions of kilometers, with detection itself playing a role through passive and active sensors, before weapons are even involved. Missile warfare seems to be a big part of that, while crew and damage simulation should mean that a fight can be more about slowly degrading a ship's capability, rather than just watching a health bar disappear. Look guys, if those systems come together, this could feel like managing a real space battle. If we're looking for an obvious comparison, I think Starsector really stands out, both visually and in that same fantasy way of starting small before gradually building fleets, trading, exploring, and carving out your own place in the galaxy. And let's be honest, Starsector is still one of the best examples of how good a top-down space sandbox really can be, especially because all of its systems come together so naturally, and that's going to be super important for this game. Antimatter seems to be pushing that idea much further into simulation and grand strategy, with deeper politics, industry, populations, and organizations all running underneath the galaxy. I mean, whether it can feel as cohesive as Starsector is really the big question. But for anyone who loves Starsector, Antimatter is very difficult to ignore. The concern with Antimatter is whether all of this ambition can actually come together into a game that feels good to play. Now, the developer has been very open that the current builds are still rough alpha playtests, so there's clearly a lot of work still to do before everything feels polished or properly balanced. And with a game this deep, that challenge becomes even bigger, because it's not enough for all these systems to simply exist in the background. The player has to understand what's happening, why it matters, and how their decisions are actually affecting the wider universe. That's probably the biggest hurdle Antimatter faces for me at this point. If the interface becomes too dense or the simulation becomes too difficult to read, some of that impressive depth could actually work against it. But if the developer can make all of that complexity feel natural to interact with, then the ambition could end up being one of the game's biggest strengths. So overall, where does this leave Antimatter? Development is now moving away from simply building the simulation and increasingly toward making it into an actual game, with future work focused on expanding colonies and giving players more to discover across its planets and wider galaxy. And if you apply before October 1st, there's a playtest coming up. Make sure to check the latest news item on Steam to understand how to do that. So yeah, look, there's a long road ahead here, and with no release date, I definitely wouldn't get carried away just yet. But the foundations are strong enough, and with the playtest coming up, I thought it was good to show it off to you all. Antimatter could eventually sit somewhere between Starsector, X4, and a full-blown space grand strategy game. For that reason alone, this is absolutely worth keeping an eye on. I've been Luke from LT Gaming, and I'll see you out there amongst the stars.